Au whakaronga ki te tangi ata manu erere runga rau e tui tuia. Tui ai runga, tui ai raro, tui ai waho, tui ai roto. Ka runga te pō, ka runga te ao ti hei mauri ora. A te mihi tuatahi, mihi ki nā atua kaha raua. A ho mai o kaha, ho mai o harawa ki a mātou i tēnei wā. I nā wā ka tōhoki. A ka huri au taka whakaro ki nā tini aitua. A ko e atu ki te pō. A haere atura. A ka huri taka whakaro ki te pāo te rāpaki o te raki whakaputa. A ko mati tō tātou taonga, tō tātou taua i Lane Down. I tēnei, i tērā pō, i nā pō, i tēnei ata. Ka nui te mihi, te aroha kia rātou ki te whānau, o i Lane. Ka aroha. Kāti. Apti hono tātou, hono rātou, kia rātou, apti hono tātou, kia tātou, tunga ora, nā ka kaunihera, nā kaimahi, tēnā koutou. Right, so just adding to welcome everyone to our committee meeting and just acknowledge passing of one of our whanaunga, one of my whanaunga from Rapaki, Elaine. Yeah, so kia ora tātou. Welcome to this meeting, committee meeting for Regional Leadership, Climate and Community Resilience. I think we're underway with recording, aren't we? Yep, cool. We've got a quorum present and we'll declare the meeting open. Apologies, I do have Councillor Karakia and Chair Scott. Apologies today, they're in Kaikoura on some council business. I don't think I've got any others. I think other than that, we've got a full house. So thank you. Conflicts of interest, I haven't been alerted to any. Has anyone got any conflicts of interest on the items on the agenda? No, ka pai. Public forums, deputations, petitions, we have none today. I haven't got any extraordinary or urgent business that's been noted, but does anyone have any? No, thank you. No notice of motion have been received either. So we'll move on to item 7 or 7.1, which is our unconfirmed minutes from our last meeting on the 6th of September 23. So we'll go to them. Has anybody got any corrections or amendments they would like to raise? No? If that's the case, put the resolution to the table. Great. To confirm the minutes, is anyone would like to move that? Councillor Ward and seconded by Councillor Burns. Thank you. So that confirms that the minutes from the last committee meeting held on September 6th of September 2023, we confirm them. All those in favour? Any against? Well, thank you, carried. And then we'll move on to item 8.1, which is our first paper, and that is on page 17 of your agenda. And that is our resolutions committee resolution status report for November. As you'll see there on page 19, that's and 20. All of ours are green at the moment. So, has anyone got any questions they'd like to raise? No. So we'll put the resolution to the table. Yeah, moved by Councillor Cranwell, seconded Councillor Robinson. Thank you. That notes the status of the previous resolution provided to the committee for November 2023. All those in favour? Any against? Cool, thank you. We'll go to 8.2, and that's on page 21 of your agendas. And this is our Q1 regional work program. And I'm going to ask, sorry, I was meant to ask Petra for the other witness. Emma, yeah, ask Emma to come to the table. Thank you. And Moray too, if you would like to come forward. Thank you. And when you're ready, I'll hand it over to you guys to speak. Thanks and welcome along.
Thank you, kia ora koutou. So this report is the Q1 program update for the two portfolios of work, the regional and strategic leadership, and the second portfolio, climate change and community resilience. So this covers the period 1 July to 30 September and provides an overview of achievement of the levels of service and updates on the key programs within those two portfolios. There's sort of a summary presented in the report and then a table with the detail in the back on each of the levels of service. So I wasn't going to go into too much detail other than that, and Morag and I are very happy to take any questions on the report.
Emma and Morag, any questions or clarification or further information people want? No, it looks like everyone's pretty happy. Well, thank you. You can step away from the table, Kelvin. So if people are happy, we can put the recommendation to the committee. Got a mover? You wants to move that? Yeah. Councillor Mackay and seconded by Councillor Edge. Do you want to discuss anything? No? Anyone else want to discuss it? Yeah, Councillor.
Just think things are doing pretty well on track, apart from those known things about consents that we've had briefings on, and that's in progress in terms of trying to pull back where some of the issues on that.
Councillor Edge. Any other discussion? No? Oh, Councillor Robinson.
I accept, of course, level 22 once again on the agenda, but I just also wanted to have some clarity on the cost to date of the grounded vessel in Banks Peninsula, if anyone can speak to that.
Have anyone in the house who could speak to that? Genevieve, yeah.
Sure. Just wondering what the costs accrued to date for the grounded ship in Banks Peninsula. Very good, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Robinson. Thanks, Justin. Cool. No other discussion? So if everyone's happy, we've got a mover and a seconder. We'll put it to the table. So that's to receive the work program report for Q1 23-24 for this committee, excluding the leading flood and river resilience program, which is reported through the Catchment Resilience Committee that we had last week. All those in favour? Any against? I'm assuming there's no abstention, so thank you. Carried. We're going to go to 8.3. That is on page, sorry, got ahead of myself. What is it? 39 of your report. There you go. So this is on consent processing, compliance monitoring, and incident response. And we're going to call Dirk, I think, Dave. And Judith is online. Thank you, Judith, for making yourself available online. Thank you. So I'll hand over to you, Dirk. Thanks a lot. Oh, just.
Sorry about that. This report is to provide information on level of service 35, and then there's also an overview of the annual compliance and incident response reports. The level of service information is on page 41 and 42. And then the snapshot information is from page 43 onwards. I'm not sure whether there's any questions about the content.
Councillor Mackay.
Just a question of clarity around points 26 and 27, which is level of service 35.5 and monitoring priority consents. I know that we have our 5-year priority plan with the 6 areas in it. Why is there a difference each year by the number of priority consents? I mean, I would have thought it would be quite static, the number of priority consents that we were looking at. 22, 23, 1,004 were monitored. You know, I mean, I'm presuming the 1,004 is the number of that identified total. 882 and of course 792 for the quarter that we're in now. So what is it that's making the number of priority consents that are eligible change?
So the high priority consents was always around 800, because there's also, as you know, with a 5-year plan, there's also other priorities like water use consents, fish screens, etc. Last year it was a bit of a stretch target and we didn't make it. So this year we've cut back to around 800 again.
I've got Councillor Southworth online, and then I've got Councillor Swiggs and Councillor Edge at the moment. So where you go, Vicky?
Kia ora, thank you. Yeah, I'm interested in, so in paragraph 34 on page 43, we mentioned that 70% of compliance checks on consents is at A grade full compliance. So that's fantastic. I mean, really good to know that there are so many people complying with the consents. We also say there's only 5% who are significantly non-compliant. But on page 49 in the attachment, there's a pie chart which shows that there are still 15%, in addition to the 5% at D grade, there's 15% at C, which have some environmental effect. And so in totality, that's actually 20% of consents that have been inspected that are having some effect, somewhere between some to significant effect. So that's 1 in 5. And so I really that concerns me. And I would like to know really, what are we going to do about that? How do we increase that that percentage of A's? And I know I think we're looking at staffing. Is that the key? Because I note that in the report we also talk about having a low number of staff on CME compared with the sort of other regions. So is that the key, or is there, and we need to put more funding in, and that's perhaps through the LTP, or what are the other things on top of that? What's the priority if we were getting that to improve? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think it's important to understand the process. And if you look at the actions, well, firstly, for those in the C category, they've all got action plans. So the difference between a C and a D is a C is consent inspected. There is a potential of a major incident. For instance, there could be a residue that could spill into a stream or something, and a C means that's identified, and we will ask the consent holder to put measures in place to prevent that spill. So there's a potential spill, it hasn't happened yet, and action needs to be taken to prevent that spill from happening, or containing the spill if it happens. A D is if it happens and there were no measures in place, or the measures didn't prevent the spill. If we just go back to page 44.41, all of those incidents are Ds because it ended up in a major impact on the environment. So if we go back to the C's again, they will have an action plan, and an officer will go back and follow up to see whether the consent holder has taken that action or not. So that's the first part. The second part of your question was about the resourcing. I'm not sure whether Judith would like to come in there.
Thanks, Dirk, and thank you for the opportunity. I think as we've discussed as we looked ahead to the long-term plan, this area of our compliance approach is one we've put a bit of focus on, and there is a lot of work happening at the moment, gearing up around applying our tahapaio methodologies into how we can more effectively and efficiently deliver our service with confidence, and that will include things like reviewing our prioritised approach. So there's a lot of work to do in the next sort of 6 months as we prepare that, but fundamentally, the more you look, the more you find. The more people we have out there, the more we're going to find instances of non-compliance. That's generally what happens. The point here is how we then transition them to become compliant. So they come up as a C because they're under action to go, but the next iteration of a visit might mean they're graded a B or a D. And you might recall the proposed measures in the LTP framework is actually to look at that rather than how many consents did we monitor in its sole as a tick box, if you like. We either monitored or we didn't monitor it. So there's a bit of a nuance in there that people, yes, they need to improve their activity for us to be ensured that their environmental effects of operating their consent or compliance with plan provisions is in place, but it is that process that we go through. So seeing that proportion probably isn't actually that unusual. If it was bigger, possibly it would be, but I would also expect if we have more work in this area doing more compliance, we possibly would see that wedge grow a bit before it shrinks, because I've seen more and we're then putting them on the path to take corrective action. Does that help?
Yeah, it'll be good to see what you come back with over these next 6 months. And I mean, for me, it's the part of the significance of this is that level playing field, which is what our planning framework provides. And for those 70% that are fully compliant and doing their bit, it's really important that we make sure that those that aren't contributing to the same level are required to. Otherwise, it really doesn't. It's just not fair system if we don't recognising the work you're doing, and that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's just to make a link between two diagrams in this paper and that compliance report, the pie chart of the C with the wedge that's, I can't remember what colour it is, I printed in black and white. But if you look at the table that had the bar graph of the type of action, an action plan, which is where a compliance officer says, hey, you've got to take some action to fix this, that actually comes under that education and advice stream, which is why it's so long, because that's our first. So it's quite directive action. It's not a if you want to sort of thing. It's actually and I'm coming back to visit again to check up that action's done. It's then when that action's not done on the subsequent visits that it triggers into the next stage of a warning letter or an abatement notice, etc. So I just wanted to make that connection. Because often we hear, or sometimes it's expressed the concern around that education part being too soft, but actually when it comes to it, it's a very formal action plan that's lodged against their consent, and then the visits are tied to making sure those actions are followed through. Yeah.
That's helpful. Thanks for that explanation. That's useful to know. Kia ora.
Thanks, Vicky and Judith and Dirk. Now I've got Councillor Swooks and Councillor Edge and now Councillor Robinson, but as yours is on different points, yeah? Yeah, so I'll go to Councillor Mackenzie, I think.
Yeah, no, thanks, Craig. My question really, and it's related to Vicky's questions, Jude, but in terms of your definition of the difference between B and C, could you perhaps give some examples on, so is there always, to be a C moderate non-compliance, does there always have to be some environmental consequence? So what's the difference between B and C in practical terms? Can you give some examples of the types of things? So if, for sake of argument, a data logger on a water meter blows up and there's non-compliance there, is that considered a B or a C?
I don't have that examples up my sleeve, Dirk. I'm not sure if you do.
So B is technical non-compliance. For example, a report submitted but it's late, your water data report. So we've got the report, you're now compliant, but you were not compliant on the 31st of July or when it was due. The certificate up the wall thing that came up, in most cases that was a B. So it's It's so you got the piece of paper, but it wasn't in the right place at the time of the inspection.
So
So it's a technical non-compliance. You may have submitted something, but it was late, or you may have a certificate, but you couldn't produce it at the time.
but the reason for my question is because I read this and I had the same issues, same questions really as Vicky, but I wondered whether in the moderate non-compliance issue, whether there was always some environmental consequence or it's just a potential for some environmental consequence. Because that
Yeah. In terms of the sea, there could be an impact, but it might be a minor impact. If it's a major impact, it's a D.
it's a potential for a minor impact.
It's potential for some.
And maybe that needs to be put in because then that perhaps categorizes exactly what we're talking about here, which might help in understanding the breakdowns.
Great, thanks, Ian. I'm going to go to Councillor Swiggs next.
Firstly, I've got two questions. On the compliance, kind of where Vicky was going, but I'm quite concerned about the drop in the numbers. And obviously the response that you've got in there is around the training of staff. But are there any other measures that can be taken to help in this space where we've got constant training issues and staff retention, things and like that? Are there anything else that we're doing or can be investigated to help ensure that we're getting keeping the numbers at the right level or at a consistent level at least?
Yeah. Do you want me to talk to that, Dirk?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, this is one of the areas of attention we're giving it to look at what could we be doing differently, and what do we need to do to support our becoming aware of issues earlier, or perhaps and being able to respond in different ways. So I guess that's part of that, using that Te Hapaiō methodology of looking at how, and so under the environmental regulatory delivery stream. So it's building on from, the current consents challenges creates a future compliance challenges in numbers and complexity of consents as well. So we're looking across the board of what are all those initiatives. Some of it's about how do we free up our staff from administrative feeding the systems and data to be able to free it up to make sure we're having the conversation with the consent holders to get the actual change on the ground. So those are all initiatives that are in play or as part of the work we're exploring going forward, which will have a slightly longer lead in time than being right for the 1st of July, but it is one of those reasons we were looking at shifting things for the long-term plan.
Cool. I mean, I'm just a little bit concerned around that lag time. I think is where I'm also. There's a bit of lag time between what we've got now and what will happen down the track. So yep. I think I'll just leave that there. And I am considerably concerned about it, just reading these numbers. The other thing is, I think this is a really good report, and so thank you for whoever's written it. It's got some really good numbers and it's got some really good oversight in here. Is this report a standing item, and can this be made into some form of dashboard that is like we have for our transport dashboard and things like that? Given this is such an important part of this council, is it possible to do that? Because I would love to see that as a standing item with a dashboard or something like that reported back to somewhere, because I think that has great oversight.
This report will go to our website, so we got a place on the website for these two reports. So annually we put it on the website.
I think as we explore that work around, and because it's obviously tied into our data system and where we draw data from to look at, could we be doing this report for our governors in a more frequent than seeing an annual report? That's something we can definitely explore as we look forward, rather than seeing a year. The past year, 6 months after it's finished, if you know what I mean.
I totally agree. I think given the issues that we're hearing constantly, and especially what I'm hearing out in our communities, having this information actually builds a really good picture. And I think we need it far more than just yearly. And I think it needs to be built into a dashboard that gives everybody a really good picture about the state of the stuff that we're reading in this paper.
Good point, Councillor Swiggs. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. So I think Judith's taken that on board, and Dirk. And I think, yeah, I mean, as we go forward into the LTP and with the, the 3 pillars and all that sort of stuff, it could be something we think about in terms of what committee it sits at and all that sort of stuff. So thanks, Councillor Swiggs. I've got a few more, so I've got you, David, but I've got a few more before you, so I've noted you. I've got Councillor Edge next, and then I've got Councillor Robinson and Councillor Byrne, and then Councillor East.
Thanks, Duke. My query for is related to page 43, item 34, clause 34, and corresponding page 47, item 56. And it's just regarding for clarification on the on-farm assessment of Mihi Kai environmental issues. Do we have an expert to go on to farms other than our the normal compliance people to just assess whether the I'm particularly interested in setbacks and critical source areas? We have a rule about, or there's a rule of about a 3 metre setback on average for from waterways for fencing, but we don't really give good guidance or any guidance on critical source areas. And just I'm concerned about, are they being adequately assessed in terms of the impact on a critical source on a waterway?
That you?
Hi. I think there's several aspects to this part which I'll try to cover off. So when it comes to our farming land use consents, which Mihi Kai is a criteria that needs to be incorporated, that has been done through the auditors of the farm plans. So not necessarily our compliance officers. So, but and that auditor training has covered off those aspects around what's required for consideration to manage Mihi Kai. So I think we're in a new space as we turn our attention with freshwater farm plans coming in the future that starts to engage us specifically around critical source areas. The other instances, of course, relate to where there is what is the conditions within the consent. And this is where, obviously, with our advice, we try to encourage those areas around looking across the whole farm as to, what activities are happening, irrigation around riparian margins and that sort of thing. So there's I guess there's two places that things get checked. One is through the farm plan audit and auditors, and then there is when our compliance staff might be on farm for such as the activity is such as the irrigation consent. So I'm just identifying there's several touch points.
Just a supplementary. So if in the review of the overall farm plan approach, and more consideration is given to setbacks and critical source areas, is it likely that as part of that compliance assessment that maybe some of the people who have A's at the moment might just be needing some adjustment or education, advice? Is that something that could be likely in the future?
Can you just repeat that question? Was it about the future or back?
No, I'm thinking about the future. Judith just intimated that when we take a different approach to whole of farm assessments, whether or not the grading that we have for people who are A's at the moment, and when we look at it a little bit more in depth to meet current requirements, that those issues related to advice on critical source areas and setbacks may require some adjustment on those farmers or those farms that currently have A's?
My understanding of freshwater farm plans is that it's a risk-based approach. So they look at all the risk for that area. It also takes into account catchment context. So, however, we still don't know what the detail of that is. So that's something that those guidance still needs to be explored.
I think it's fair to say there will be some instances where that is the case, but to say that will always be the case is making assumptions about lots of people's practices that I don't. So I think there would be some iteration, given it's a shift from a good management practice point of view to that risk-based approach.
Thanks, Grant. Councillor Robinson, have you got a question?
Just a bit of detail on, I guess, recidivist offending. So if they've breached a consent or even had some warnings in place, what percentage of those people actually go on to be non-compliant later on? I guess just a bit of a filter to show the repeat offenders and what we can do about those. Thanks.
I think the experience that we got was with implementation of farming land use consents and farm environmental plans. As Judith has mentioned earlier, through education and advice, we've got the majority of consent holders across the line. I think in the end of the 1,100, there was about 8 that we had to follow up right at the end. And there were no prosecutions in that case. It ended with, I think, abatement notices. So normally the way that we approach this is you provide advice first, education, then it's a written warning. Then you go to abatement notice, if needed, infringement notice, which includes a fine. And then lastly, you got prosecution. But in most cases, I mean, very few of our cases end in prosecution. And normally infringement loads on the lower side. So once you've issued your abatement notice, and the abatement notice can be 2 things. You can give a abatement notice to stop an activity, and you can also then give one to correct for corrective action. And in most cases, that's enough to convince the consent holder to do the right thing. Sorry, Judith.
I think Judith wanted to speak, but has he answered?
I guess that's right. So there's two, and we had the similar experience when it came to implementing water meter regulations. The first intervention of telling people what they needed to do, and the initiatives we put in. You start with 100, and then you get 60% of the people didn't need a follow up, but you followed up the 40, and then you got another 60% of that 40 that took action. So the actual number that end up only taking action at the really pointy end generally ends up quite small. I do obviously want to point out we have some really challenging situations of environment consents and repend issues, like if we, the Bromley plant, for example, would be an example where we've got, it's hard to resolve. So I guess that's quite different from how, the sample, the situation Dirk's talking about, when generally we find as we talk to people, they do the right thing, and they, and yes, they might need more and more of a nudge, but very rarely does it require, the really sharp end of the compliance stick to get the action. We get there. But there are some ongoing issues, and I don't know if that's what you refer as repeat offenders, Councillor Robinson, or not. But there are some complex situations that are hard to resolve. Now, whether or not they end up in a prosecution or not, it's a different situation. But it is, I'm just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Councillor Burns.
Kia ora. Thanks, Dirk. Thanks, Judith. I concur with Councillor Swiggs. I think it's a good report. I like the idea too of having this available a bit further. I've got a couple of questions. I would say too, just as a comment, yeah, the headline that Christchurch City Council is a recidivist is probably slightly provocative, would be the way. So I understand that there are some difficulties around that sort of thing. My question though, for clarification, on page 40, item 8, it mentions the fish kill incident previously this year in the Opawahu, and I don't want to get into detail. I know we've been told some time ago that there was an investigation. I wonder, do we at least know whether that was related to any particular consented activity?
Got anyone that can answer that in the room or online? Or is that currently under investigation?
It's under investigation, and I'm not sure whether it relates to a consented activity or not adhering to a permitted activity under the rules. So I don't know if it's a consent breach or a plan breach, that detail, but that's why it's under investigation, to narrow that down. And yeah.
Could I just have a follow-up? So thank you, Judith. So given that it's still under investigation and the timeline involved with having some sort of outcome of an investigation, are we likely to hear anything back at council about where we're up to at least?
I can reach out to the team and find out that out.
Kia ora, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Burns. Thanks, Judith. Councillor East.
Thank you. I'd just like to take up a little bit more on Councillor Swig's comments about the importance and significance of this report, and I would just like to compliment staff for the detail that this report has come forward. My comment, I don't have a question, it's more of a comment, and I think as Councillor Swiggs indicated before, this area is one of the high focus areas for council, both in terms of the work we do and in terms of our image in the community. It does sort of concern me a little that it's probably needs more visibility and regular reporting, and I'm wondering really where this sort of activity sits in our committee structure. And I think, you know, we have terms of reference for our committees, and they're all obviously quite valid, but the regulatory committee meets weekly, and within a month there's probably a lot of scope to be looking at this reporting in greater detail. The regulatory committee is generally over before it starts, and I think, you know, there's some space there where this activity and its importance to ourselves and our community could be given greater visibility. So I'm just making the comment that great work that staff are doing in collating this information and bringing things to our attention. But I think this area of consent processing particularly, and we are getting a lot of attention in recent weeks from compliance monitoring in the public. And I think we just need to lift our profile a little more and be giving this item a greater consideration. And so I'd just like to float the idea that I think this area probably could be transferred across to the regulatory committee, where there is scope to be dealing with needs and reaction to things on a more frequent basis. And so I'll leave it at that and just say I think it's a subject that needs some consideration to give it more profile.
Thanks, Councillor East. Good thoughts. Thank you. Thank you. I think that's come to the end of our questions. Thanks, councillors, and thanks staff for responding to them. Really good thoughts there. So yeah, Dirk, you can get back on the table. Thank you, and Judith, you can turn your camera off if you want, mate. Thank you. And so we've got 3 recommendations here. Firstly, that we receive the information and the progress against targets. And the second is for information on the overview of annual compliance and incident response. And thirdly, that we note the provision made in the draft LTP for the sustainable consent delivery function, uplift in the compliance function. Yeah, Councillor Robinson moving. Is that what you're doing? And Councillor Swiggs seconding. Thank you. Any discussion people want to have? I think we've had a pretty good go at it. Put that to the vote then. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against? All carried. Thank you. Go to 8.4 on page 55. And this is on an overview of council submissions to central government. And I think we've got Emma present this. Thank you. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you. So this report provides a summary of the submissions that we've made over the past year on a range of central government policy. And it's really just to capture the degree of work that's been undertaken. And you can see from the report the very broad range of government policy and direction that we have taken the opportunity as Environment Canterbury to provide feedback on. So in total, we've made 19 submissions, or 18, and there's one final one, the biodiversity credits paper, which has just been finalised. So this is to give visibility to that work and really highlight our role in the advocacy space and how we're really shaping and making a commitment to ensuring really good policy and legislation at a government level, and how that applies to our role as a regional council.
Thanks, Emma. Any questions from councillors? No, doesn't look like there is. Thanks, Emma. I note with interest that clause, paragraph 9 there, about the natural and built environments and spatial planning thing, and how there's a little bit of work that we influenced there around the clarification of a definition of a rated river too. So that's important. Hopefully that stands through and gets through in the test of time. Cool. So we'll put this to the council, the committee. So that we received the update of the 19 submissions provided to central government over the period from September 2022 to November 23. Do I have a mover? Councillor Edge, seconder, Councillor Ward. Thank you. Any discussion? Yeah, Councillor Edge.
I just want to congratulate staff for addressing what's been extremely busy year in terms of addressing government legislation and the standard of excellence of the presentations of these submissions to government, which we know does have some effect, but the professionalism of our staff is exceptional. And I think for those reasons, council have generally been really quite supportive of the draft submissions that come before us. And it's really good to see. And so I just really want to thank staff for their high caliber of input into these.
Thank you, Councillor Edge. Any other discussion? Yep, Councillor Robinson.
I actually just want to concur with that, especially the suggestions we make and how staff actually acknowledge that and incorporated it as best they can. I think that's really something that I've seen a big uplift in, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Robinson. Any other discussion? Cool, we'll put it to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against? Carried, thank you. Okay, 8.5. This is on page 59, 59 of our agenda. And is it Victoria coming and Amanda coming to the table? Thank you. Just one, okay. Oh, Victoria's online. Okay, so thanks, Amanda. I'll hand over.
Kia ora, ko Amanda Thompson Takonua. So the purpose of this report is to approve our submission on the proposed NPS-Natural hazard decision making. I understand you've had the opportunity to review the paper and it can be taken as read. The Ministry for the Environment has developed this national policy as an interim step while further comprehensive national direction is developed. If pre-election timeframes hold, a final NPS is expected in early 2024 and the comprehensive national direction would be expected over the next 1 to 2 years. While in general we support the NPS proposal, we found it to be lacking in detail, particularly in relation to technical guidance and the use of ambiguous terms and an overall lack of clarity, which will create uncertainty for interpretation and implementation of the NPS. There's potential for oversimplification of complex issues and a lack of flexibility in response to issues like climate change. There's a risk of increasing inequality within communities and potential for conflict with other national direction. Our submission provides recommendations for the NPS to reduce these issues and support councils in the management of natural hazard risk and informed decision making.
Well, thank you, Amanda. Thanks for that summary. Any questions of Amanda and Victoria? Yep, Councillor Edge.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm looking at page 64, clause 8. And it's sort of written through the submission as well, about the concern that we have of ambiguity in the document. Do you think there's a risk that if the ambiguity in the guidance tools are not actually established in the final report, that those risks will be taken out of our hands and determined by the Insurance Council? Do you think it's coming to that kind of probably a bit tricky, sorry.
Amanda, if it's difficult, if it's not out of our sort of scope to answer, then don't worry about it. But you read?
Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, maybe I'm just being, it's a rhetorical question. Sorry. Sorry, Amanda.
Sure, I suppose it's always an option that something could be out of our hands and resolved elsewhere. We already live with a similar ambiguity in our current approach, so this NPS really adds nothing to support us to have a more consistent approach, I think, and that's nationwide is an issue.
Thanks, Amanda. Well answered. Councillor Southworth.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm interested on page 68 in Appendix 1 under point 2, second paragraph down. We state that in Canterbury, a major hazard risk disproportionately affects the rural community. And I just wondered whether we whether I could have some clarification on that, because when I think about the biggest populations being or potential for being affected through coastal flooding, like are we talking about riverine flooding here? Because to my understanding, whilst I know that there's flood infrastructure protection infrastructure goes in place, and I get the point about having a broader or having a low rating base for the rural, which puts them into a situation where they may have more risk because they don't have the funding for the infrastructure. But in terms of sort of hazards, the Waimakariri River and Christchurch City and Kaipoi and some of the other urban populations, and I don't know how Ashburton Township, whether that counts as urban or rural, but to me that just seems like an oversimplification and it's mixing two things. So am I misunderstanding what's meant in that? Because it does seem to me like that actually there's factors that enable protection of the more dense populations because of the higher amount of rating units for an affordable price, but it's not the same as the hazard and the risk. Could you explain a bit more how we conclude what we've said in that paragraph, please?
Sure. I suppose the intention of that was to point out that those smaller communities have a lot of flooding risk. Also, wildfires are increasingly something we're expecting to see as a hazard. The impact of climate change, and the smaller rate base obviously means there's less protection or less funds available to support those communities. So you're right, it is not necessarily that there's more risk of a hazard happening. It's just the impact of that hazard is potentially higher in those communities.
Okay. I wonder if it might be worth looking to rephrase that a little, because I don't know that, you know, on the face of it, I don't know that I would agree with the statement that's being made, although I understand the implication or the intention of the point that's being put there. But just for accuracy, I think maybe that should be just looked at. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Ian McKenzie.
Yeah, look, I think that this statement actually does reasonably well define the issue, and that is, if you take Christchurch as an example, they have a stop banks that protect it from flooding, for a 1 in 500 or somewhere between a 1 in 500 and 1 in 10,000 year event. If you take Temuka, it's protected from a 1 in 50 year event. So in terms of the risk, it's much greater in the rural area. And as John Dunkel will attest, in the floods in May 21, it was rural people who couldn't get to hospitals because the rivers had blown away the bridges and blocked the roads. So the effect on them is greater than it is in urban areas where everything is far more centralised. So I think the statement, and a lot of that does come down to funding. So I think the statement is actually true and can be justified.
Thanks, Councillor McKenzie. Anyone else got a question? I know that we, in the resolutions, let me just have a look. We have the whole thing where minor changes can be made. Yeah, so that could be noted, what you said, Vicky, but also noting what Councillor McKenzie said. And if that could just be clarified, rather than changing the intent of the sentence, but just be clarified as Councillor Southwest said, then that's fine, I believe. But yeah, are people happy with that? So that could be done through a minor adjustment if you see fit, if the Chief Executive sees fit. Cool, shall we? I think that's, any other questions on me? Any other questions of Amanda or Victoria? Cool, thank you. You can step away from the table. Thank you. Have I got a mover and a seconder for this? Okay, Councillor Swiggs and Councillor Sunkel. Moved by Councillor Swiggs, seconded by Councillor Sunkel. And that's that we approve our Regional Council submission on this National Policy Statement for Natural Hazard Decision Making, and delegates to the Chief Executive the amendment of any minor or clerical errors in the submission prior to submitting to the Ministry for the Environment. Any discussion to be had? Yep, Councillor Swiggs.
Yeah, I didn't have any questions. I just wanted to sort of make a few notes. I think it's a really good submission, and sort of honed in on a few points there in the process, which is really good. And it's good to hear that we have ambiguity now, and this really isn't really, well, what's being provided hasn't really addressed that core fundamental, which is good that that's reflected in our submission, because we do need to be really clear about the national technical standards on risk thresholds. I think that needs to come through a lot more. We need better guidance required on the appropriate mitigation measures, because we're the ones that implement those, and we have to do those through those national policy standards. I mean, we've got climate changes, you know, there's a whole lot of uncertainty there, and actually we've got Dr. Rod Carr coming to talk to us soon, and I was listening to something he was talking to at a business event a few days ago, where he said climate change is here now, the issues are facing us now, the transition is here now, and it's going to affect poorer communities, countries, more than it's going to affect us, and we have an opportunity in our country. But actually, when I read through this submission and also the provided documents around the actual what the government has proposed, it hits home that it's going to also hit our poorer communities in our regions and in our suburbs more than the richer communities in our regions and suburbs. So it's not just at a global level, it's actually micro level as well. And I don't see that coming through in these national policy settings. So I'm really pleased, obviously with what you've written and what we're going to be providing, because I think that does start to address some of those issues. And there's a whole lot of other notes that I've written here because I had a really good read and it got a little bit wild with the whole thing. So thanks for the submission. That's good to see it go through.
Thanks, Councillor Swiggs. Councillor Each.
Yes, another excellent submission, and yeah, I'm supportive of it. I just wanted to pick up on a few things that I've sort of caught my eye in terms of the submission process and on the appendices, if you like, and in particular, one of them was to do with assessing risk on page 70, and it flows over to page 71. It sounds like that the draft document talks about establishing levels of tolerance that people, what's an acceptable, questions, what's an acceptable level of tolerance in terms of risk, and it struck me that in the comment there that regional councils will need to provide robust evidence to support a policy that requiring a more precautionary approach. So it's basically being precautionary, and what are the levels of tolerance? Well, we had an experience in a major flood event in Waimakariri in 2014, well, in Canterbury, 2014. And the one community that in particular that was really affected by upswelling of groundwater coming through permeable gravels, then hitting a bit of a roadblock where it met quite clay heavy soil. And the community were really angry about what's questioning the council. What are they going to do about it? And the urgency in the response to that was, I think at the time, a $40 million process of increasing the size of culverts, digging out gentle swales to make them into a ditch, and all of, it was a reactionary process that was probably over the top. But in that particular case, it was because the tolerance level was not acceptable. So that is a bit of an issue going forward, is that as we get more frequent events and risk events, will our psyche start to change a wee bit, and that we will need to be more tolerant of these things. And I think on page 72, sort of in the same vein, medium, high, medium or low risk, in terms of that decision making and the guidance about what are the exceptions in terms of the tolerability of things, and there's no clear guidance of that, and it comments that the potential impact of requiring decision makers to apply the framework is the risk of different interpretations. Well, we're back to the courts making those interpretations for us, I suppose, in the future. And if the review of this document provides better level of guidance for us, then those potential legal aspects in court process might be reduced. But anyway, and the idea that we, in terms of mitigation, it's a case-by-case basis. There's some discretion as well. I think it's good because we do need some flexibility in how we manage these things going forward. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Councillor Each. Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you. I'm happy with the submission. I was just reflecting on a conversation I had with an ex-senior police officer, not JP, a different one, and a major who's just retired out of the army. And we were talking about dynamic decision making, and my only fear in these things, if we become absolute in what we put in place, we lose that ability to be dynamic in our decision making. If we have all of country or centralised thinking, that is the way. We don't get the opportunity to live with some of those tolerances that some of our communities might accept, and understanding the repercussions of. And we may have something in place that's absolutely precautionary, but it really defies the logic of what you're trying to achieve within a community. So just a word of aware of that sort of dynamic decision-making process of having some flexibility and subsidiarity to have some horses for courses in a space. Recognising that we do have problems in North Canterbury where housing was put on floodplains and then they complain. So it's again, how do we manage the process to ensure that people understand the risk if we do have some tolerance or some dynamics in those processes, but not be absolutely resolute and binary in our decisions.
Councillor Sunkel. Councillor Burns.
Kia ora, thank you. Yeah, and thank you very much. Again, I've got great staff in here, and it's good to have people putting stuff together. I just want to follow up on what Councillor Southworth said in regards to that, the disproportionate for the rural community and that. I'm just wondering, I'm not sure this is a question that can be answered here, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Isn't that somewhat mitigated by the disproportionate amount of river control infrastructure there are in our rural communities? And perhaps that comment about the rural community does, in fact, as Councillor Swiggs talked about that sort of socio-economic sort of position, doesn't it need to sort of be fleshed out somewhat with a minor alteration, as the chair of this committee has just said, rather than just identifying rural community, the less advantaged members of the rural community? Maybe that might be a solution.
Councillor Burns. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, look, I'd just like to support John. I think it's a good submission. And I'd just like to perhaps suggest that we are servants to our communities when it comes to assessing the level of tolerance for events. And if we can, and if our communities say to us, we want protection, and we tell the communities what it's going to cost to give them that level of protection or risk mitigation, and they're happy to pay that, then in fact we should be listening to our communities and putting those practices into place.
Councillor Mackenzie. Any other discussion? Councillor Robinson.
Sorry, I wasn't going to say anything until Councillor Burns spoke up about the disproportionate amount of, I guess people either have money or they don't, and the urban environment also has both, people who don't earn an income from land, or they might be living on the smell of an oily rag as well. And I just want to absolutely agree with what he's saying there, because there's going to be two sides of every, I don't know how I'm directing myself here, but you know what I'm saying. Yes, there's people in the rural community that seriously do not have money, and got to look at those people as well.
Councillor Cranmer.
Kia ora tātou. Support what's been said regarding the submission, especially regarding policy 7, and kind of incorporating mātauranga Māori into all the practices in the NPS. I mean, it goes into the future for local government, how to incorporate Te Tiriti o Waitangi into this work. But and I know here at ECAN, Canterbury Regional Council, that we do that, and then it says there we need to engage early. But to get that across, I suppose across Aotearoa, I mean, that's the big impact that we need. But just supporting that, really acknowledging mātauranga Māori and how that can be brought into natural hazards, Maira Noa, being involved in the environment, that the knowledge is there. Just have to find a way to use it. Build up.
Thank you, everybody. I think that's it. So we've got our mover and seconder, haven't we? Yeah, Councillor Swiggs moved it and Councillor Sunkel seconded it. So put it to the vote. All those. Yeah. Oh, okay. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against? Any abstentions? Councillor East. Oh, thank you. Carried. Okay, moving on to 8.6, which is the report from the chair. So as you can see there, page 75 through to 79, we've got a number of things highlighted there, in particular council submissions. So I don't know if Councillor Sunkel wanted to talk to this one, but I think we've had it before around the emergency management bill. You've been there? Yeah, happy. It's just a bit of an update about that. Also, we made a submission to the inquiry into climate adaptation, which I was really proud of the work that the council did alongside staff. So acknowledge Morag there at the back of the room as well. In terms of the workshop we had and the points that we were able to get through. So looking forward to the next iteration of that work coming back from government. And also, you know, as we understand, it's going to inform the development of the climate adaptation plan, which is pretty apt in terms of the discussion we've just had around that NPS on natural hazards decision making as well. So I think there's a lot of issues wrapped up there that'll come through in that, and hopefully that gets a good hearing at government as well. In terms of regional partnerships, I don't know if Grant wanted to speak about the Greater Christchurch partnership work that was held and the meeting held on the 20th of October, but also the spatial hearings that you've been part of, if you wanted to give any comment.
Yeah, just quickly, the hearings have finished. We had, I think it was nearly 400 submissions, and quite a few, or about four days of listening to people who came to talk with a whole range of issues. A lot of discussion, or submitters were talking about land that could be used for urban growth. So that was quite a big point. We have our first deliberations meeting tomorrow, and then we have the final one on Monday. And then out of that, a report, staff will prepare a report, and then that'll go to the Greater Christchurch Partnership Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Edge. And also just to note, the Mayoral Forum and the Civil Defence and Emergency Management meetings will be held later in November. So they're coming up. Waitata Action Impact Fund, you'll see that's a pretty important fund that we have for our community, and another allocation was made. We had 350k available. We got 34 applications requesting 650,000, so always oversubscribed out there in our community, but 23 groups received allocation out of those 34, and 12 got multi-year allocations, so that's great to see. Good work there. The youth rōpū, heaps happening there if you look at paragraphs 13 to 17 there. I don't know if Alice has had to pop out, but Oscar, was anything you wanted to highlight? I know you're not on the youth rōpū anymore, but anything that you've heard from?
I think it's just pretty self-explanatory from what's on the paper. Yeah.
Ongoing councillor liaison that we have with the group as well. Myself and Greg, Vicky, can't remember who else is on it. But yeah, we do our regular meetings with him as well. And then integrated planning framework. Obviously, the RPS, the regional policy statement, is going through another phase of public engagement with the summits that are happening on at the moment. So 10 full-day meetings with our community. We're partway through that. I think there's only one or two to go, I think. So yeah, that's been a massive undertaking by the staff. And of course, the next thing is to start drafting the regional policy statement in the first part of next year. So that'll be from that engagement. So that's where we're at. And then 2 points on sort of our climate action planning work we're doing. So we've got our partnership plan that we do with all the other district councils under the Mayoral Forum, and so that's happening at the moment. That's had a meeting recently that I was involved with. And then we've got our own Canterbury action plan that we're doing underneath that or alongside that. that's working through its way as well. Resource management reforms, you can see there. So there's still ongoing change in that space, and that's it. Are there any questions that people have about the report? No? Yep, Councillor Sung.
Thank you. I'll just take the opportunity, and it's not directly related to the submission we made on the emergency management bill, just to I guess give some vision to the continuing conversation that we're having in regard to the civil defence review that we did for Canterbury. We've just been a fraction of an attention and not necessarily huge buy-in from some of the TAs in the space. So we're working through that, looking to see what low-hanging fruit we can implement, and as part of the budget that sits in the long-term plan to begin some of the work of uplift and some strategies of just how we progress those conversations and genuinely get a trajectory of uplift as opposed to the status quo where we sit. Everyone is somewhat comfortable in their own space, but don't necessarily see a regional view. So just an ongoing piece of work there with some challenges, but we're working.
John, Grant?
No, I mean to say that on the Greater Christchurch Partnership, apart from representatives from the 4 councils, there's also a central government representative and a mana whenua representative on the hearings panel.
Thanks, Councillor Reach. Any other comments? Cool. I will put that resolution to the. I'll move that from here. The seconder, Councillor Burns, that we received the chair's report for the Regional Leadership Climate and Community Resilience Committee. All those in favour? Any against? No, cool. Carried. Thank you. Okay. Next meeting. Next meeting is not till next year, 16th March next year. So that's understandable. What's happening? So we'll close with Karakia now. So thanks everybody. Thanks for the work. Thanks staff. Thanks councillors as well. Awesome meeting. Lots of big chunky stuff there, especially around the compliance, the consenting issues that we know have got, and good suggestions I think by councillors around the frequency of that reporting, which staff seem to acknowledge. So and potential where that sits in the future. So yeah, good stuff. Ai, he Karakia Whakamutunga o tātou nei hui. Unuhia ki tūru tapu nui a tāne, kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua I te ara pakata, koe rā e roko, whakiiri aki ki roka ki a tīna, haumie hui e tā ki. Kia ora.